Hello, we're here at the Seattle Antiquarian Book Fair on October 9th, 2011. I'm Taylor Bowie, and we're sitting here with my friend Eugene Vigil, bookseller from Linden, Washington, whom I've known for some time. And we're going to just talk to Eugene about his life and times in the book trade. So Eugene, welcome.
Welcome, Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just start out and give us a little background about yourself. Where were you born and raised? A little bit about your family in the early days, your education.
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, 1941. I'm the third of 8 children. There are 3 boys and 5 girls in the family. My mother is emigrated from Ukraine, and my father migrated from the Southwest. And they met in Chicago when my father was learning the electrical trade, and my mother's brother went to the same school. And this was an interesting period in Chicago's history, from what I see from a lot of the photographs, because people who didn't have a lot of money could take advantage of the park system in Chicago along the lake, and they would go for picnics. And I thought that was just a one-time event, but when one of my uncles died, and after we buried him, I walked down along the lake and saw that there were many families still doing the same thing. Many of them were Hispanic families having picnics out in Lincoln Park and the Park District.
That sounds nice.
In terms of education, my mother had a dictum, which I wasn't the best of students. Her dictum to me was, you can gain all the money in the world, but you can lose in an instant. What you know, you cannot lose.
Those are wise words.
And I debated that. I thought that was the craziest thing that anyone could ever say. Because my father had his own business and he was making good money. And then I thought, how could one what would be the case where you would lose your memory and not be able to use it? And the only way that you could do that is if you had a mental illness, or if you became a vegetable, a stroke or something, and at which point it didn't matter. Now, my mother, coming from humble beginnings, believed in education. She was prescriptive, although I wasn't keen on the idea. She looked at each child and she said to each, in her own mind, I want this one to be a lawyer, this one to be a doctor, this one to be a concert pianist, this one to be a soprano, this one to be a nurse, this to be a teacher, and so on. As it turned out, my older brother is a lawyer. He got a degree in engineering and then went into law and became a patent attorney. My older sister was working toward being a concert pianist and had degrees in music from DePaul University in Chicago, and she became a teacher of music now and has a large number of students that she teaches out of her home. For myself, my mother wanted me to be a physician, and I pursued that until my junior year in college, at which point I decided I wanted to do something different, and I went into botany as a profession. And my younger brother is a physicist. He's the next elder, and he became he had a hard time. He got his PhD in physics from Ohio State in the 70s, and it was a very difficult time for a physicist. He worked as an associate at MIT, and then because my father was from an old school from the Southwest of a large family, his dictum was, if you could carry a tool, you worked. So we all learned the electrical trade early on.
In addition to these other
activities.
More, I guess you'd say, rarefied things.
Yes. So we all learned electrical trade. So my brother, when hard times came, he went and has built a very fine business in the Boston area. He's done a lot of the wiring for streetlights all around Boston.
Amazing. Family sounds like a combination of very practical and I don't know what the opposite would be, but not ambitious ambitious. That's too simple a word, but looking beyond just the regular day-to-day kinds of things.
And the thing was that it was all about learning, knowledge. And my mother, despite sometimes financial hardships, filled the house with books, encyclopedias, whole sets of good fiction, American writers, and it was always there. So we had that as a backdrop. And then we had a small bungalow in the city proper, and we had a little garden, and I helped in a garden and got interested in plants that way.
In botany, that was a good way to be introduced. Did your mother have education beyond?
No, not very much. She had a couple of years of college, possibly.
She sounds like a great person.
She was.
I have to say, I really do. That's great. Well, now I know I know you did go into the field of botany, and then the next thing I know is that you worked for the United States government for some time.
Yes. I taught for a bit, a couple of universities, Marquette University and University of Maryland, and then I had an opportunity to work at the Department of Agriculture and enjoyed that.
What years would that have been?
The Department of Agriculture was something like about 81 to 95, something like that. And then I had come from a minority background, and I had a keen interest in what was happening with the minority students. And an advertisement came by that they were looking for an employee at the National Institutes of Health in one of their minority programs. So I applied, and I took that position and became a administrator in one of the sections of NIH. And I did that and then went into research review and retired in 2001.
Now, after your retirement, obviously, you became involved with the book trade. Had you gotten your feet wet with the book business before that?
Yes, I did. I backed into the book trade through an interest in gardening.
That's nice.
I started out, I had a nice house in Beltsville, Maryland, and we had good-sized property. And a neighbor said, well, you need to build a rock garden. And I didn't know anything about rock gardens, and I thought that rock gardens were just,
rocks.
You get one book and away you go.
Yeah.
And then the man said, the neighbor said, well, you really should go and see these people who have professional gardens. So I went and saw them, and the next thing I know, I'm buying all kinds of books on different genuses of plants and different garden techniques and how to build walls for rock gardens. And I had all these books. I said, I've got to do something about it. I better start a business. So I started collecting a lot of gardening books. And I did my first book fair. It really wasn't a book fair. It was the Maryland Flower and Home and Garden Show. And it was a week long in the cow barns in Timonium, Maryland. And
now, had you established the business per se? I know your business name now is Antiquarian Botanicum.
Botanicum, right. At that time, I had, unfortunately, a printer who made up cards that, business cards as my profession, and he put out this card. He put that on a cover, this card, Plant Psychiatrist, and he had one of his Victorian couches as a motif.
Oh, no.
And so the irony of this is that this caught, and in fact, people still remember years later the card.
Oh, that's nice.
And furthermore, when I was working at the Department of Agriculture, I was doing this on weekends as a part-time business. Someone at the Washington Post, they were doing the special sections in their Sunday magazine on people who had second careers. And so they did a piece in the Washington Post.
That's nice. Did they reproduce your business card?
No.
Do you still have any of those?
I think I have one.
I think one should go to the ABA archives. I think that would be a fine addition.
But I was most fortunate. The second book fair I did was a Tom Macaulay book fair up in Timonium.
Tom Macaulay. Now, not to get off track, but tell us a little bit about your memories of Tom Macaulay.
Well, they were mixed.
Yeah.
I did a lot of the Macaulay fairs early on, and I would do them on weekends. And Tom Macaulay would bring in, which today you wouldn't blanch at, but he'd get over 100 dealers packed into these places, into the different venues. And he would do no advertising as far as the dealers were concerned. He would have the table right at the front of the show, and they'd be sitting there enjoying a good cold beer, and dealers would complain, and it says, how come there's no one in the room? It seemed hardly anybody was in the room buying.
Yeah.
And he says, well, he would say, well, I got mine, you get yours.
Well, he didn't believe in spending a lot of money when he didn't have to.
But I didn't realize that a lot of book fairs, which we know now, are often dealer
Of course.
fairs.
Right.
And dealers would come out of the woodwork. I mean, I bought some things at his fairs I wish I had. I mean, Civil War letters from New Orleans, illustrated with little drawings of the managers.
For $100.
Incredible stuff.
Now, this was before you'd retired and you were still doing
Right.
it part-time. Now, what changed when you retired from your other career and went full-time into books?
In terms of change, part of it had to do with mentoring. And
Well, good. I was going to ask about that, about mentors or influences in the book trade, too. So,
but as a specific answer to your question, Taylor, I developed this great passion for the book. And the more I was engaged in buying and selling, the more I realized that this was a true love. And I felt it was important to pursue this avenue. I enjoyed what I was doing, working for the government, for the National Institutes of Health, but I also realized that it would be better for me to continue as a bookseller. And so I made that transition right after 9/11.
oh, really?
I had scheduled my retirement September 21, 2001.
Really?
And my last major review, I was doing a lot of site views, was at Los Alamos, New Mexico,
Really?
doing a site visit for their major center grant, what they call them. And these were heavily funded.
Yeah.
And my panel were together the morning of September 11th, and we were finishing up writing our document, and one of the members had to leave early, and he left. A few minutes later, he came back, he says, we've been attacked.
So
It was an unfortunate day, yes.
It's a day every one of us will always remember where we were when we heard the news.
Yes.
Now, you were living in Maryland at the time.
Yes.
And how did it come that, happily for us who live in the Northwest here, that you came all the way out to live in Linden, Washington?
Yes. Well, I met a very nice woman, Valencia Banks was her name at the time. I don't hold it against her that she's Canadian.
Known to us as Val.
Yeah, Val.
I didn't know her full Valencia.
Valencia, yes.
That's a very elegant name.
And she loved gardening, and she loved books. And her mother, for many years, would read the classics. And Valencia has a lovely little library in her condominium up in West Vancouver, British Columbia, and enjoys books. And I thought this would be a wonderful arrangement.
Where did the two of you meet, actually?
In a garden.
That's nice.
I mean, not to treat it lightly.
No,
I had met a man through my interest in rock gardening at a rock garden conference in Philadelphia. And he was from Vancouver, and he says, well, if you ever come up to Vancouver, come and visit my garden. You're welcome to stay with me.
Oh, how nice.
And I didn't know anything what he had. He had this lovely garden on the coast of the north coast of Vancouver, which is a part of West Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And Valencia was a volunteer who came and weeded his garden every day. She didn't want any money, she just wanted to do it.
Loved it so much. Now, when was that you met and married?
We met back in probably around 2002 or there, something.
Not too long after.
Yeah.
Well, you've settled out here in Linden. I've been to your home. It's just beautiful, and enjoyed some of Val's great apple pie. And you work out of your home now, too.
Yes.
You have a special kind of like a library room in your
Yes.
home. Well, tell us a little bit about your inventory. And then I'd also like to hear, in conjunction with that, how the internet relates to your business, how it's affected and changed your business.
Perhaps I could address the inventory in relation to mentoring. And getting back to my early entry into the bookselling trade, I did a second show after the Maryland Home and Garden show. It was a Macaulay show, and it was the same location, different building. And I was going around trying to get a sense of what was involved in selling books. Right. And I met this man, Ron Cozy, from Buffalo, New York.
What, Old Editions?
Old Editions books, yes.
Very nice fellow.
Yes. And by chance, he became my mentor.
I see.
And I would call him up. He walked me through the shoals of all kinds of transactions in the book trade, guided me in how to look at being a bookseller. And over time, he coached me in how to be a true antiquarian bookseller. One day I remember he said, Eugene, he says, you're buying these garden books from other people. They're worth, say, $30 a piece. You can't really charge more. You may get 20% discount, but you can't really charge more for that. So he says, rather than buy 10 $30 books, buy one $300 book. So that got me into buying more expensive books, which in turn, then he said, well, you need to have reference books in order to know the quality of the book, its completeness and its rarity, and so on. So then I started buying reference books, and I started going to auctions, and I met R.B. Robland up in New York when Alan Bass, who owned the Antique Pavilion on 19th Street, set up a Metropolitan auction house.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And I bought them. There were some wonderful pieces that were available. And so I would buy books there, and then I would come on weekends and sell either at the flea market in New York or do one of the local fairs and turn over and then keep it going. So little by little, I started getting totally away from buying ordinary gardening books into more expensive books. One time I was doing the antique book fair in Baltimore over Labor Day. It was a Shador show at the time, and I decided to put an ad in the AB Weekly, American Bookmen's Weekly, advertising my firm. So I paid for a full page because I figured that's the only way you get attention. And I indicated I needed botanicals in it, and I went home one night and I was told that I got a phone call from a man who was looking for herbals. And it turned out that Mike Slicker from Lighthouse Books in Florida had a Turner that he just brought to the fair. He had repaired it a bit, so he sold it to me. I didn't have any money. I mean, it was an expensive book. I think it was like $10,000 for the book. But this man bought it. Yeah. And from that purchase on, I helped the man who was a businessman in California build an incredible library. And ultimately, I ended up giving him sort of a brief appraisal of his collection, which I saw at the time he wanted to sell it, was over $3 million.
Wow.
And that was just the botanical end.
You've hit on something interesting there about as you moved away from the inexpensive books to the finer things, and this would go back to the effect of the internet. As we've all seen how the internet has revealed that a lot of just kind of general out-of-print books are really not only are they not rare, they're not even uncommon. They're in fact dirt common. Is there any other ways that you can see that maybe the internet has had a particular impact on your business?
Oh, absolutely. With regarding to the value of books, we saw a decline, and I thought maybe this was local to the United States. I do the Paris Book Fair every year, and I asked the French dealers, what has happened? And they said overnight, the value of their average books dropped 40%. The thing, too, with the internet and the different websites that are available has now makes it possible for any person, no matter where they are located, if they have access to the internet, to explore, discover, catalog, describe a book to the nth degree. When I first started, I would go to the University of Maryland to look at their book prices current, to volume after volume and volume. Then I'd look at reference books they had. I would spend enormous time. Now, in seconds almost, a minute, I can get that information. And with things like what Jim Hinks, a fellow member, has done with Via Libri, creating its meta search engine and now adding all kinds of additional search that makes it possible. Google Books. A lot of people may decry that it's a shame that Google has digitized books, but for a bookseller, Google Books is a godsend because you can go and get a rare book. They've digitized the entire book. You can collate a copy you have in front of you. If it's missing something, you will know.
That's right.
And then also, you can go now with the ABA giving us access to the Oxford National Biography website and also the American National Biography website. You can get information on different people and where they place. Or even if you see a name written in a book, you can check in terms of provenance, was this an important person?
Who perhaps had some connection with the author or the field, whatever the book's about.
In fact, I'll give you an example of how significant the internet is. I didn't have it at the time I received a call from the University of Texas Austin Library. They were doing the millionth book addition to each one of their libraries. And I had a copy that I bought at Freeman's of the electrical 1774 theory of electricity, and it was a rare copy, but I couldn't check the author. And when they bought it, they were so excited because it was a very special copy. This is where the internet has changed our business.
I would agree with you. I'd add that a lot of people, I don't mean to demean them, but kind of in the lower end of the trade, seem to be very upset about the free information that's now available. But a good bookseller and somebody who understands the merits of these historic objects, like you can go online and do even better. So some people have been kind of defeated by the internet. Would you say that for many of the rest of us, it's been a great boon?
Absolutely, it has been a tremendous boon.
Tell us a little bit. So many things have happened in the trade in the last 15 years. It's the world in general. But if you could predict, what do you see as the future of our end of the trade, the antiquarian book trade, or maybe just the future of the book trade in general?
There are a couple of avenues here. At the high end, we have collectors, and they will buy very good books, and it could be a whole range in price if it's a particular subject, and that will work. They will. You can build collections, and we really have a wealth of collectors in the Pacific Northwest. Many of them are unknown to us. The other thing is that there are young people.
Yes.
And young people are interested in the knowledge. I'll give you an example that happened yesterday. I had 3 people who were students from MIT who came into the booth. One was working on his doctorate now in cosmology, a physicist. They were all physicists. One had quit and is working for Microsoft, and another is into environmental science of sorts. At the end of the day, the woman who worked for Microsoft came and bought a book on cybernetics.
Nice.
And the thing is that each one had an interest to buy books, but the one who was employed was able to buy it. They're going to buy. and they will work that.
In your impression, I mean, talk about younger collectors, a great interest of mine, do you see them as seeking information or more the appreciation of the historic object and artifact? The fact that the information in many of these books could be gotten online, but to have the original place where it first was presented to the world, is that the appeal to the younger collectors, or is it a combination?
I think it's a combination. The special book that you talk about would have to be the special book would have to be something that they could afford, and many of them don't have the income at the time, so they're buying for information.
Okay.
But even collectors want things for information. What I'm finding in real specialty areas now is provenance.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I have switched my business in the last 5 years to add manuscripts, original manuscripts, as early as I can get them. I have a 16th century manuscript. Admittedly, it was a copy of an herbal.
Mm-hmm.
I have gotten some rare scientific items, but I've noticed a lot of dealers are getting letters
mm-hmm.
or little notes and tipping them into books, or selling manuscripts.
Yes.
This is a specialty area, and I just saw an article on the internet about ephemera items.
Mm-hmm.
That ephemera, because it cannot be priced on the internet, is unique.
Absolutely.
And
more booksellers
yes.
seem to be coming to that realization.
And to give you an example of how this works, people come up. I had a dealer in New York this spring offer me a collection of about 100 or so seed catalogs.
I was just going to say seed catalogs. That's not funny. I was thinking ahead.
Seed catalogs, and some of them are before 1850, and they're all American.
That's nice. That's
and
nice.
I have a very good customer who probably will buy them.
Yeah. And the number of copies of any one of those that have survived is so few.
Yes, and these are in pristine condition.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is very good.
Yes.
Well, you're still going strong. It sounds like to me you're having a better time than ever. I mean, you really do love what you're doing.
Yes, I do.
Any even vague thought of retiring or ramping down or anything like that?
Well, it's interesting. You should ask that question because every now and then my dear wife would say, "Well, I think you're getting into retirement mode," and that just perks me up to work harder.
It's interesting. I certainly haven't noticed that. You know, observing you over the last 10 years or so you've lived here. So,
but I do see for us and the specialties we have that you can't sell something you don't own. And you have to often see the items. You can't always buy on spec, although I have done this in auctions and have won and lost, as many of us have shared. But going to book fairs in Europe and around the States has been invaluable, not only meeting other members of the trade and getting to know them and then getting to know us, but also to buy really fine books from them.
Let me just backtrack a minute. Obviously, the answer to my question is you don't plan to retire anytime soon. Who are some of the people in the trade right now that you really admire, you think are kind of among the movers and shakers? Could be in your field or anywhere.
Well, one person who has really befriended us and has been very helpful is David Bowman, aside from my mentor. And then Charles Ackman is my sponsor for the ABIA, and of course, if you know Charles, he keeps you honest.
He's a very humorous fellow too, as is David Bowen.
Yes.
A very droll sense of humor.
And I've learned a lot from Don Heel and the Bergs, Uta and Robert Berg, who have become good friends. And we've met a number of good dealers over in Europe who have been very helpful to us.
That was terrific. Well, Eugene, thank you very much for sharing a little bit of time with us and talking about your life and your career. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, Taylor.
And I'll look forward to seeing you at many book fairs to come.
Thank you very much. Can I add one last thing? In the interview with Natalie Bowman, she made a very interesting point, which I had not really taken to heart until she said it. She said, if I don't sell a book, it's not that I can't sell it, it's that the dealer, the buyer hasn't come yet. And that is so true.
Very good. Good words. Thank you, Eugene.
Thank you.